today we will be discussing on foodborne infection and intoxication. So pathogens that cause foodborne illness are classified into three categories. They are viruses, bacteria and the parasites. So these foodborne diseases which are caused by the pathogenic microorganism are of two types, infection and intoxication. So this foodborne infection, it is caused by the ingestion of food that contains the live bacteria and which grow and establish themselves in the human intestinal tract, whereas foodborne intoxication is caused by the ingestion of food that contains the toxin which are formed by the bacteria and that resulted from the bacterial growth in the food item. And for this, the live microorganism does not have to be consumed. So, the following condition must be present for a foodborne illness or the poisoning to occur. First one is the microorganism or its toxin must have to be present in the food. Then, the food must be suitable for the microorganism to grow. And the temperature must be suitable for the microorganism to grow. Then, enough time must be given for the microorganism to grow and to produce a toxin. And then finally, the food must be eaten or consumed. So now we'll come to the classification of microorganism based on their activity. The first one is beneficial microorganism. So these organisms may be used in the process of making new foods. Say for example, cheese is made with microorganisms which convert the milk sugar to acid. The second one is spoilage microorganism. So they cause food to spoil and are not harmful to humans. So the third one, which is very important here, is the pathogenic microorganism. So these are disease-causing microorganisms. The living microorganism or a toxin, that is microbial waste product, it must be consumed to cause a symptom that are associated with specific pathogenic microorganism. So now we'll see some of the bacteria that are involved in the foodborne illness. So the first one is Bacillus cereus. So Bacillus cereus is a gram-positive, facultative, anaerobic, spore-forming rods. And this organism is widespread in nature and in foods that are especially in the spore state. So their sources of contamination may be soil, unpasteurized milk, cereals, herb and spices, meat pies, cooked rice and fried rice, and starchy foods. So the diseases, so Bacillus cereus can cause two distinct types of illness. The first one is a diarrheal illness with an incubation period of approximately 10 to 16 hours and an emetic, which is also known as vomiting illness with an incubation period of 1 to 6 hours. The symptoms include abdominal cramp, watery diarrhea, nausea and vomiting. So these diseases can be controlled by meat and meat products must be cooked properly. Then cooked product must be cooled to 41 degree Fahrenheit within 4 hours and hold the hot foods at or above 140 degree Fahrenheit. So next is Campylobacter jejuni. Campylobacter jejuni is a bacteria that is found in the intestinal tract of animals and poultry. So these organisms are the gram-negative microaerophilic curved or S-shaped rod. And this organism is very sensitive to oxygen, drying, freezing, salting and acid condition. Campylobacter jejuni can produce a heat labile toxin. And the sources of the organism is that they are found as a normal microflora of most animals and poultry. Contaminated water, infected pets and their associated foods include poultry, raw meat that includes beef, pork, mutton, and unpasteurized milk, etc. So the bacteria causes a disease which is known as Campylobacteriosis, which is an invasive gastroenteritis in humans. The symptoms of this disease includes fever, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, headache, watery and occasionally bloody stools. And the incubation period for the disease is 2 to 3 days. And the disease can be controlled by thoroughly cooked meat, poultry and fish. Then proper sanitation of food contact surfaces and utensils. Then proper hand washing after handling raw meat, poultry and seafood. And finally, the use of pasteurized milk. Next we'll come to Clostridium botulinum. Clostridium botulinum is a gram-negative, rod-shaped anaerobic spore-forming bacteria that produces a neurotoxin. So among this toxin, 7 toxin types are present, that is type A, B, C, D, E, F and G. This bacteria can exist as a vegetative cell or a spore. So when the conditions are favorable, the spore grows into the vegetative cell. Further, when the vegetative cells grows into high numbers, these bacteria they produce this toxin. And the vegetative cells of the Clostridium botulinum, they are destroyed by heat, but the spore is very resistant to heat. So temperature well above 100 degrees Celsius, that is 212 degrees Fahrenheit, are needed to destroy the spores. And the sources of the organism are the soil for the type A and B toxin, oceans and lakes for type E toxin, and the sources of the spores include vegetables, fish, meat and poultry. So botulism, that is the disease that is caused by Clostridium botulinum, it results from the consumption of food that are contaminated with the preformed toxins. So the toxins type A, B and E most often are associated with the botulism in humans. Then type A and B is most often associated with soil, and type E is associated with water, especially the seafoods. So another disease which is also known as infant botulism, it results from the growth and the toxin production of Clostridium botulinum in the intestinal tract of infants, rather than from eating foods that contains the preformed toxins. And the symptoms include double vision, droopy eyelids, difficulty in speaking and swallowing, difficulty in breathing, and finally paralysis. And the disease can be controlled by proper preservation methods for canning low acid foods such as vegetables, meat and poultry. Then acidification of foods to be done below pH 4.6 and reduction of water activity to 0.85 or below. So now we'll see Clostridium perfringens. So this organism, that is Clostridium perfringens, is a gram-positive spore-forming anaerobic rod-shaped bacteria that can produce an enterotoxin which is released in the intestine. So these bacteria, they can exist as a vegetative cell or in the form of spore form in the food. So the germination of this spore and the outgrowth into the vegetative cells, they occurs in food that are inadequately refrigerated. So toxin production by the bacteria, they normally occurs in the intestinal tract. So their sources of contamination or the sources of the organism are the intestinal tracts of the animals and human, soil, sewage, etc. And their associated foods include cooked meat and poultry products, roasted beef, etc. So this Clostridium perfringens food poisoning causes a disease that is known as gastroenteritis. The symptoms of this particular disease includes abdominal cramps, watery diarrhea and nausea. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 8 to 34 hours. And the disease can be controlled by meat and poultry products. It must be cooked properly. then food must be reheated to 165 degree Fahrenheit for 15 seconds if it is not consumed immediately. Then foods must be refrigerated at 41 degree Fahrenheit or below. Further, proper cooling techniques are very much necessary to prevent the spore germination. Now we'll come to Escherichia coli. The specific Escherichia coli serotype, that is O15787, is a gram-negative aerobic bacteria that produces a toxin which is known as Shiga toxin. And these bacteria, they are most commonly found in the intestinal tracts of infected animals and the fecal contaminated water. So foods such as ground beef, unpasteurized milk, etc., they may be contaminated by this bacteria. And these organisms, they cause a particular disease which is known as hemorrhagic colitis. So elderly and the children, they are very much prone, or they are very much susceptible to this disease. And a possible complication which is known as hemolytic uremic syndrome, it is a urinary tract infection that is a leading cause of acute kidney failure in children. And the symptom of the disease includes low-grade fever, severe abdominal cramps, bloody diarrhea, nausea and vomiting. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 5 to 10 days. The control of this disease can be done by ground beef products must be cooked thoroughly, then wash hands properly when handling raw ground beef, then the foods must be reheated to 165 degree Fahrenheit for 15 seconds, then proper sanitation of food contact surfaces and utensils, and finally the foods must be refrigerated at 41 degree Fahrenheit or below. Listeria monocytogenes are the gram-positive rod-shaped bacteria that thrives in the anaerobic and microaerophilic condition. So these Listeria species, they are ubiquitous in the environment. So Listeria monocytogenes is common in the intestinal tract of animals and humans. In animals, the bacteria can be shed in the milk in the case of cattle. They can cause mastitis and abortion. At present, 7 serotypes are associated with Listeria monocytogenes, but only serotype 4b has been found to be associated with the foodborne illness outbreaks. And the sources of the organism are the intestinal tracts of animals and humans, then contaminated water, soil, manure, etc. And the associated foods include unpasteurized milk, raw fruits and vegetables, etc. So this Listeria monocytogenes, it causes a disease which is known as listeriosis, which is a potentially fatal disease that occurs most often in the immunocompromised individual and elderly. Pregnant women and their unborn fetus are also at the greatest risk. The symptoms of this disease includes meningitis, spontaneous abortion and stillbirths, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, fever, septicemia and encephalitis. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 2 to 21 days. So to control this disease, the food must be cooked thoroughly. Then use of pasteurized milk is recommended. Then proper sanitation of food contact surfaces and utensils. Then fresh fruits and vegetables should be washed thoroughly. So next we'll come to Salmonella. So Salmonella are the gram-negative non-spore forming rods, and many of the species of Salmonella bacteria, they exist and several causes foodborne illness. Salmonella typhimurium has been the species that accounts for most of the foodborne illness that is related to this bacteria. Another species, Salmonella enteritidis, has been associated with the foodborne diseases that is resulted from the consumption of contaminated undercooked eggs. So the bacteria, that is Salmonella, they are easily destroyed with heat. They are present as the normal microflora of animals and poultry and in unpasteurized milk. And the foods that are associated includes raw meat, poultry, eggs, milk and dairy products, fish, shrimp, etc. And the consumption of the live Salmonella bacteria, this can result in the foodborne infection, which is commonly called as salmonellosis. And the symptoms of this disease, that is salmonellosis, includes stomach pain, diarrhea, nausea, chills, fever and headache. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 6 to 48 hours. And to control this disease, all poultry products, eggs, ground meat products and fish must be thoroughly cooked. And use of only pasteurized milk is recommended. And thoroughly wash hands before and after handling of raw meat, poultry and egg products. And use clean utensils and surfaces to prepare the food. So now we'll come to Shigella. So this Shigella are the gram-negative, non-spore forming, facultative, anaerobic, rod-shaped bacteria which produces an endotoxin known as Shiga toxin. And the sources of organism are the fecal contaminated water, food handler with poor personal hygiene practices. And this species, that is the Shigella species, they causes a disease that is known as shigellosis. And this shigellosis disease is also known as bacillary dysentery. Numerous species of Shigella, they are associated with the foodborne illness outbreak. Shigella soni is one of the Shigella species which is the major cause of shigellosis from the food. That is virulent Shigella organism, they attach to and penetrate the epithelial cells of the intestinal tract. After invasion or after they gain entry, they multiply and they spread to the epithelial cells. Then the symptoms of the disease includes abdominal cramp, diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and the stools may contain mucus or blood. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 12 to 48 hours. Then to control this disease, use of properly treated water. Then food must be cooked at appropriate temperature. Then now we'll come to Staphylococcus aureus. So this organism, that is the Staphylococcus aureus, is a gram-positive, facultative, aerobic spherical bacteria that produce a very heat-stable toxin. So this organism, they can multiply rapidly in food that are held at the room temperature, and the toxin can be produced by the microorganism growing in the food. This toxin is called as enterotoxin because it causes gastroenteritis or the inflammation of the lining of the intestinal tract. The sources of the organism are the human skin, that is infected cuts, pimples, nasal passage, throat, and the associated foods include salads, bakery products, ham, etc. So staphylococcal food intoxication, it results from the consumption of food that are contaminated with the toxin produced by the Staphylococcus aureus. And the symptom of this disease include severe abdominal cramps, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. Then the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 1 to 6 hours. Then to control this disease, proper sanitation of the food contact surfaces and utensils is very much necessary. Then refrigerate and hold the foods at 41 degree Fahrenheit or below. Next we'll come to another organism that is known as Vibrio. So these organisms, Vibrio, they are the gram-negative curved rod-shaped bacteria. 3 species of Vibrio are pathogenic for humans, that is Vibrio cholerae, Vibrio parahemolyticus and the Vibrio vulnificus. So this Vibrio cholerae is responsible for cholera outbreak and the epidemics, and the sources of the organism are the intestinal tract of infected humans, fecally contaminated water, and the associated foods include seafoods and the raw or undercooked foods. So this Vibrio species, they cause a symptom of invasive gastroenteritis, And the symptoms include abdominal cramps, watery diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, fever, and septicemia. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 2 hours to 7 days, depending on the species. And to control this disease, thoroughly cooked seafoods, including oyster, must have to be carried out. Then use of proper hand washing techniques and practice. Good personal hygiene must have to be carried out. Then proper sanitation of food contact surfaces and utensils. So then now we'll come to Yersinia enterocolitica. So these organisms, that is the Yersinia species, they are gram-negative, rod-shaped bacteria that are commonly found in a wide variety of animals, birds, and environmental sources. And their sources of the organism or the sources of contamination are the intestinal tracts of infected animals, poultry, and humans, then contaminated water, and the associated foods include seafood, meat. Under meat are the pork, beef, lamb, etc. Then poultry, unpasteurized milk, etc. So these organisms, they cause yersiniosis. This yersiniosis is a gastroenteritis and the symptoms include sharp pain in the lower right quadrant of the abdomen, then diarrhea and vomiting. Incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 24 to 48 hours. And to control this disease, cooked meat, poultry and seafoods must have to be thoroughly cooked. Then the use of pasteurized milk is highly recommended. Then proper sanitation of food contact surfaces and utensils. Then use of proper hand washing techniques and personal hygiene practices must have to be carried out. Now we'll see the viruses that are associated with the foodborne diseases. So it's the hepatitis A. The hepatitis A virus is an ultra-microscopic organism that must have a living host to multiply. So this virus, when transferred to the food, they may survive for several days, even at the refrigeration temperature. And sources of the organism are the intestinal tract of infected humans, contaminated water, and the foods that are associated are mostly the seafoods. The infected person may set the viruses in their fecus long before the disease symptom appears. So the person infected with the hepatitis A virus should not handle food or work in a food establishment until they have received the proper medical treatment and are no longer shedding the viruses. The symptoms for this disease include lethargy, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, fever, and finally jaundice. And the incubation period for this disease, it ranges from 10 to 15 days. And to control this disease, seafoods including oysters must have to be thoroughly cooked. Use proper hand washing techniques and practice good personal hygiene procedures. Now we'll come to the parasites that are involved in the foodborne diseases. That is the Giardia lamblia. Giardia lamblia is a flagellated protozoa. In the stable cyst stage, these organisms, that is Giardia lamblia, can be shed in the fecus of the infected humans. The cysts, they cannot multiply outside the living host, and the sources of the organism are the intestinal tracts of the infected animal and the humans. Then water. Then giardiasis results from the consumption of the cyst stage of the Giardia lamblia protozoa. And the symptoms of this disease include diarrhea, flatulence, and the bloating. And to control this disease, that is giardiasis, proper disposal of fecus and the wastewater treatment must have to be carried out. Then proper filtration before chlorination of the water supply. Then use proper hand washing techniques and practice good personal hygiene procedures must have to be done. So that was about the foodborne infection and intoxication. And in the conclusion, I would like to add that As foodborne illness is caused by the consumption of contaminated foods, it is advised to adopt food safety practices to avoid the occurrence of food poisoning outbreaks. And these can be achieved by the proper sanitation and practicing good hygiene, ensuring that the food that is prepared is free from unwanted microbes and their toxins.